Now, it's been one of the most anticipated comebacks in pop. After 40 years, ABBA are finally back with a new studio album.
The dazzling lights of the 1970s disco era shine bright, and the infectious melodies of ABBA fill stadiums as the world watches four Swedish musicians become pop royalty. Benny Andersson and Anni-Frid Lyngstad, once a golden couple in both music and life, stood at the center of it all. But behind the sequins, harmonies, perfectly choreographed performances, and picture-perfect smiles, a storm had been brewing, one that would shake the very foundation of their success. For years, fans believed ABBA's split was simply the result of time, changing trends, and personal differences. But now, Benny has broken his silence, revealing a side of Frida the world never truly saw, a side that was complicated, turbulent, and, at times, deeply destructive. Their love, their music, their friendship, it all unraveled in ways far darker than anyone ever knew. But Frida's conflicts didn't end with Benny. Throughout her career, she experienced clashes, betrayals, and personal struggles that told a far more dramatic story than ABBA's polished image ever suggested. At the heart of it all was her relationship with Benny Andersson. Once deeply in love, they were ABBA's second power couple, their romance mirroring that of Björn Ulvaeus and Agnetha Fältskog. But unlike Björn and Agnetha, whose relationship was famously volatile, Frida and Benny's breakup was defined by bitterness, resentment, and accusations that cut far deeper. When they first met in the late 1960s, Frida was a fiery, independent woman, ambitious, determined to make her mark in the music world. Benny, a musical genius with an ear for melody, saw her charisma and talent as an undeniable force. Together, they built something powerful, a musical empire and a seemingly unbreakable bond. But behind the scenes, cracks had already begun to form. As ABBA's fame skyrocketed, so did the tension. Benny, known for his meticulous, methodical approach, often clashed with Frida's emotional, strong-willed nature. She was passionate and expressive, he preferred control and structure. Creative differences became personal frustrations, and those frustrations soon boiled over. By the early 1980s, Benny's heart had wandered. Rumors of infidelity surfaced. When the truth came out, Frida was devastated, betrayed, humiliated, and furious, not just as a partner, but as an artist who had given everything to ABBA. Their relationship collapsed under the weight of broken trust, and by 1981, it was over. The wounds didn't heal. Even after ABBA split, resentment lingered. Frida saw Benny as cold and detached, a man who discarded their love once he no longer needed it. Benny, in turn, struggled with Frida's unpredictable nature, her fiery temper, and her refusal to simply move on. And then there were the whispers, two beautiful women, one band, and an inevitable rivalry. For years, fans and tabloids speculated that Frida and Agnetha were locked in a silent war, competing for the spotlight. Both women publicly denied it, calling each other friends, sisters, partners in song. But behind the scenes, the truth was more complex. Frida, with her dramatic stage presence, husky voice, and commanding energy, often felt overshadowed by Agnetha's ethereal blonde beauty and iconic vocals. Agnetha was seen as ABBA's golden girl, while Frida was often cast as the supporting voice, the one who had to fight for recognition. Tensions rose in the studio, on tour, in interviews. Who would sing lead? Whose face would grace the album cover? These questions created a rift that never fully healed. By the time ABBA dissolved, Frida and Agnetha had grown distant. They rarely spoke, and while the public believed the group ended on amicable terms, insiders knew better. For all the glamour and fame, Frida Lyngstad's life was no fairy tale. Behind the dazzling lights and soaring harmonies was a woman haunted by shadows, by betrayal, grief, and rejection the world never saw. She was born in 1945, as World War II ended, and Norway tried to heal from Nazi occupation. Her mother, Cinni Lyngstad, had fallen in love with a German soldier, Alfred Haas. When the war ended, women like Cinni were branded traitors, humiliated, and shunned. Their children, known as Tyskerbarnas, German children, were treated even worse. Frida was seen as a stain on Norwegian blood, a reminder of a painful past. Believing her father had died in battle, Frida's mother fled to Sweden, seeking safety and a fresh start. But the trauma followed them. Frida grew up knowing she was unwanted by her homeland. Sweden gave her shelter, but never erased the wounds. She was a girl without a country, a child without a father, a woman always searching for where she belonged. Years later, Frida discovered her father was alive. Their reunion was awkward, cold, and far from the dream she had clung to. There was no joyful embrace, no magical ending, just silence, distance, and a sense of abandonment that never truly left her. That pain seeped into everything, her relationships, her music, her identity. After the heartbreak of Benny, Frida sought a new life, and in 1992 she married Prince Heinrich Reussel-Reuss of Plauen, a German aristocrat. To the world, it was a fairy tale come true. ABBA's queen had become a real-life princess, living in a Swiss castle far from the chaos of pop stardom. But even this fairy tale had cracks. Prince Reussel was respected, powerful and controlling. Frida, who had spent her life fighting for independence and self-expression, suddenly found herself bound by strict traditions and silent obedience. The cage she thought she had escaped had returned in another form. She longed for stability, but instead traded freedom for restriction. Just as she began to adjust to her new life, tragedy struck. In 1998, the unthinkable happened. Her beloved daughter, Anne-Lise Lotte, was killed in a car accident. No fame, love, or fortune could prepare a mother for that kind of loss. It shattered Frida. Her daughter had been her anchor, her reason to move forward after everything else had fallen apart. And now she was gone. Frida withdrew from the world. She stopped performing, stopped speaking publicly, stopped wanting to exist in the world that had taken so much from her. She faded from the spotlight, retreating into isolation. The once bold woman who commanded the stage was now silent, grieving not only for her daughter, but for the life she never truly managed to hold on to. The world remembers Frida Lindstad as an icon, a legend, but her real story is one of pain, survival, and resilience. She was born into rejection, rose to fame through determination, but lost nearly everything along the way. Abandoned, betrayed, controlled, and broken, yet she endured. Even in pain, even in silence, the echoes of her voice remain. The world took much from her, but the music she helped create, that was hers forever. For decades, fans saw Frida as the bold, unstoppable force of ABBA. But behind the powerful vocals and fiery red hair was a woman who faced unimaginable struggles. Her battles with Benny, the silent distance with Agnetha, the personal tragedies, all painted a portrait of someone whose life was filled with as much heartbreak as triumph. And now, with Benny Andersson breaking his silence, the world is left to reconsider her legacy. Was she a victim of her past, or did her own fire contribute to her downfall? Was she misunderstood, or equally responsible for the conflicts that shaped her story? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Frida was never just one thing. She was not simply the victim, nor the villain. She was a woman made of contradictions, tough yet vulnerable, ambitious yet insecure, loyal yet volatile. In a band that represented polished perfection, she was often the rawest presence, the most emotionally exposed. And that was part of what made her unforgettable. In the studio, her voice could go from soft and haunting to powerful and commanding in the space of a single song. On stage, she was magnetic. But away from the spotlight, Frida often struggled to reconcile her public image with her private battles. Fame had a cost, and for Frida that cost was steep. The pressure to always appear composed, glamorous, and in control clashed with the reality of a woman still grappling with abandonment, rejection, and a lifetime of emotional scars. Even her greatest success, the global domination of ABBA, came with its own loneliness. The more famous she became, the more isolated she felt. She once described the experience of being on stage, surrounded by thousands, yet feeling completely alone. The roar of the crowd could never drown out the quieter, more painful voices in her mind. The doubts, the grief, the longing for a kind of peace that always seemed just out of reach. After the groups split, Frida attempted to reinvent herself, both musically and personally. Her solo work showcased a more mature, introspective artist, but the shadow of ABBA loomed large. No matter how far she tried to run, she could never escape the image the world had carved of her, the glamorous pop star, the mysterious brunette opposite the golden girl. It was a role she played so convincingly that few bothered to ask who she really was underneath it all. Relationships continued to be a battleground. Trust was difficult. Intimacy came with hesitation. Even in her later marriage to Prince Russo, while love existed, so too did the patterns she had spent a lifetime trying to break. For all her strength and defiance, Frida remained haunted by the fear that love, real, unconditional love, was something just beyond her reach. The public saw a woman who had everything, but inside, she often wrestled with a deep and abiding loneliness, one that had followed her since childhood. That loneliness was rooted not only in personal relationships, but in identity itself. Born a child of war and controversy, her earliest years were shaped by exile, shame, and secrecy. These beginnings planted the seeds of self-doubt that fame would only magnify. When ABBA soared to international stardom, Frida became one of the most recognized women in the world, yet the girl inside her, the girl born to a rejected mother, the child branded as unwanted, never felt worthy of it. She spent decades overcompensating, pushing herself to be stronger, bolder, louder, more magnetic, trying to drown out the quiet but persistent inner voice that told her she didn't belong. Music was her salvation, but it was also a mirror. Each time she stepped into the studio or stood beneath the spotlight, she was forced to confront the emotions she tried to suppress. Songs like The Visitors or her haunting solo track, To Turn the Stone, carried more than melodies. They carried her sorrow, her defiance, her longing. Her voice, with its raw, earthy quality, always seemed to hint at something deeper. While Agnetha's voice floated with angelic precision, Frida's grounded the music in something more visceral, more human. It was the voice of someone who had lived through pain and had the scars to prove it. And yet, as the years passed, Frida grew tired of performing for a world that only saw one version of her. The glamour that had once thrilled her now felt like armor she couldn't take off. Each interview, each camera flash, each revival of ABBA's legacy forced her to relive moments she had long tried to leave behind. The band's reunion in the public consciousness was bittersweet for her. On one hand, the music deserved to live on. On the other, it chained her to a past that was both magical and traumatic. Nostalgia didn't always feel kind. It was often a double-edged sword, reminding her not only of success, but of everything she had lost along the way. Privately, she began seeking meaning beyond fame. After the tragic loss of her daughter, her grief led her inward. She explored spirituality, immersed herself in nature, and embraced the solitude her earlier life had denied her. In the quiet hills of Switzerland, far from flashing cameras and screaming fans, Frida tried to rebuild herself from the inside out. She found moments of peace in the simplest things: gardening, painting, walking alone through the countryside. These were not the grand triumphs of her earlier life, but they were victories nonetheless. Small acts of healing in a life that had so often been defined by emotional survival. Even as she withdrew from the spotlight, Frida remained fiercely protective of her legacy. She was not interested in rewriting history, only in reclaiming her own narrative. When others spoke for her, they often got it wrong. They focused on her feuds, her heartbreaks, her silences, but rarely on her growth, her resilience, her strength. She knew that her story was not neat or easily categorized. She had been hurt, yes, but she had also hurt others. She had made mistakes, pushed people away, and sometimes let her wounds speak louder than her wisdom. But she had also loved deeply, fought bravely, and refused to be reduced to a stereotype. Her later years were marked not by regrets, but by reflection. She learned to accept that life had unfolded the way it had for a reason, even if that reason wasn't always clear. The fame, the losses, the relationships, they were all chapters in a book she had finally come to read with compassion. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Not to fans, not to former bandmates, not even to herself. She had survived more than most, and in the end, that survival was its own kind of success. When ABBA made their long-awaited return to music with Voyage, Frida's participation was quiet but deliberate. She no longer needed to be center stage. She no longer sought validation. Instead, she sang for the love of the music, for the connection it brought, and for the memories it honored. In her voice, aged and weathered, there was a kind of grace, less about perfection, more about truth. It was a reminder that even broken things can be beautiful, that even a life marked by pain can be lived with purpose. Now, as the world looks back on ABBA and reconsiders the stories of the individuals behind the glitter, Frida's truth stands apart. She was not the golden girl. She was not the peacemaker. She was not the icon molded for easy adoration. She was something harder to define, complicated, courageous, and deeply human. And maybe that's what made her unforgettable. Because, in the end, Frida Lindstad wasn't just part of ABBA's legacy, she was its soul. And long after the lights fade and the music quiets, her voice will linger, not just in the song,